Justine Pissot.
Justine got obviously an opportunity with the Aces, and she had a good debut.
Immediately, she got an opportunity. Aces, immediate.
Those sanitized, perfectly focus-grouped public relations buzzwords are exactly what they want you to swallow without asking any uncomfortable questions. When Stephanie White stepped up to that microphone and officially announced the departure of 4 key players from the Indiana Fever, she wasn't just turning a page in a playbook. She was executing the calculated erasure of talent. What the mainstream sports media is framing as a necessary evolution for a young, rebuilding team is actually a deliberate, systematic dismantling of the very foundation that kept this franchise afloat during its darkest years. They want you to believe this is just business as usual in the WNBA. They want you to think that Clearinghouse is the only way to build around their new superstar core of Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. But the reality is far more insidious. This isn't about clearing cap space or finding better fits for a fast-paced offense. This is about ego, control, and a desperate front office trying to erase the evidence of their own past failures by scapegoating the very players who gave everything to the organization. To understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, we have to look past the press conference platitudes and examine the undeniable hard data. We are talking about the sudden and unceremonious exit of players who didn't just walk into the league with potential, but who immediately produced tangible, undeniable results. Look at the raw numbers. Over the past 3 seasons, these departing athletes averaged near double-doubles, putting up massive rebounding numbers against the most physical front courts in the world. They poured in thousands of minutes on the hardwood when the cameras weren't focused on Indiana, when the stands at Gainbridge Fieldhouse were half empty, and when the national media couldn't care less about the Fever. We are talking about a $22 million gamble in franchise valuation and salary cap maneuvering that was built entirely on the backs of these specific players. These are grown adults, seasoned professionals, who have bled for this franchise, not naive minors who can be shuffled around like irrelevant pawns on a board game. They put their bodies on the line, playing through injuries, enduring grueling travel schedules, and acting as the loyal foot soldiers for an organization that was constantly in flux. And how does the organization repay that blind loyalty? By kicking them out the back door the second the spotlight gets a little brighter. When you look at the trajectory of the Indiana Fever over the last 4 years, you do not see a franchise that was gracefully marching toward a championship. You see a franchise that was desperately treading water, heavily relying on the sheer individual brilliance and unyielding hustle of the exact players they just threw away. The calculated erasure of talent doesn't happen overnight. It happens through a series of subtle disinvestments, through strategic leaks to the press about locker room chemistry, and through the deliberate marginalization of players who dare to advocate for their own worth. Let's look at the quantifiable facts that the Indiana front office desperately wants you to ignore while they push this $22 million gamble on the fan base. Between the 2022 and 2024 seasons, these departing players accounted for over 40% of the team's total defensive rebounds, 35% of their points in the paint, and were consistently ranked in the top percentile for contested shots altered. They were the ones taking the physical punishment down low so that the guards could operate on the perimeter without fear of brutal screens. We are talking about millions of dollars in generated revenue, merchandise sales, ticket renewals, and localized broadcast engagement that occurred specifically because these athletes kept the team competitive when they had no mathematical right to be. And yet, the narrative is being spun that they were somehow holding the franchise back from reaching its ultimate destiny. This brings us to the actual turning point, the moment where the villain's true motives were laid completely bare for anyone paying attention to the intricate politics of professional basketball. The turning point wasn't a bad game, a missed defensive assignment, or a heartbreaking losing streak in the middle of July. The true turning point was the realization that keeping these high-performing, ambitious players would force the coaching staff to actually manage complex personalities and integrate established, demanding talent with incoming superstar rookies. It's always easier for an authority figure to demand total subservience from a blank slate than it is to earn the respect of veterans who know their own worth and have the statistics to prove it. Stephanie White's return to Indiana was heralded by the local media as the triumphant homecoming that would magically fix all of the Fever's deep-rooted structural and cultural issues. But this sweeping roster purge proves that her strategy is simply to eliminate anyone who might challenge the new hierarchy in the locker room. It was a conscious decision to protect a bad prior decision: the front office's historical inability to draft and develop complementary role players by scapegoating the stars who outgrew the dysfunction. This is old-school coaching bias masquerading as modern analytics. The front office looked at a roster full of strong, independent, established athletes and decided that their ambition was a liability rather than an asset. They chose to punish that ambition. They punished the players who asked for better practice facilities, who demanded better travel accommodations in the pre-charter era, and who wanted their on-court production to be reflected in their collective bargaining agreement negotiations. This $22 million gamble isn't about basketball strategy. It's about absolute power. Now, the apologists, the local beat writers, and the front office defenders will immediately rush to the barricades to justify this purge. They will tell you that the WNBA salary cap is incredibly tight, that the new collective bargaining agreement forces tough, unemotional decisions, and that in order to maximize Caitlin Clark's unprecedented, generation-defining playmaking ability, the team desperately needed to surround her with a completely different archetype of player. They will argue that these four departing players simply didn't fit the pace and space, transition-heavy offensive scheme that Stephanie White wants to run. They will say this is a mathematical necessity, a painful but required $22 million gamble that had to be made for the greater good of the franchise's long-term championship aspirations. But let's completely dismantle that cowardly narrative piece by piece, because the advanced analytics completely expose the lie. First, the idea that these players couldn't run the floor is statistically absurd. Synergy data from the last 2 seasons shows that these specific athletes were in the 80th percentile in transition scoring efficiency. They were the ones grabbing the defensive rebound and initiating the fast break with outlet passes. Second, the salary cap argument is a convenient smokescreen designed for casual fans who don't understand the intricacies of the CBA. The Fever had multiple avenues to restructure contracts, utilize trade exceptions, or stagger veteran extensions to keep this core together. They had the cap flexibility to offer bridge deals. They had the draft capital to attach to minor trades to clear space, but they chose not to. They chose the most aggressive, damaging, and disrespectful route possible because they didn't want to do the complex administrative work required to manage a legitimate super team. Finally, the narrative that they were bad locker room fits is an absolute insult to their unquestionable professionalism. These players were universally beloved by their peers, constantly praised in anonymous player polls for their relentless hustle, their unwavering ambition, and their fierce, uncompromising support of their teammates. They were the ones organizing team dinners, mentoring the younger players, and holding the locker room together through grueling losing streaks. They didn't fail the Indiana Fever. The Indiana Fever failed them, actively choosing to punish their ambition rather than reward their unyielding loyalty. That raw frustration you hear in the voices of the departing players isn't just venting. It is the undeniable sound of the veil being lifted on a broken, archaic system that treats world-class athletes like disposable commodities. You want to see how a competent, confident organization handles a roster transition without resorting to the calculated erasure of talent? You want to see what actual leadership looks like when faced with a massive influx of attention and pressure? Look at Nate Tibbetts over in Phoenix, a man, not a woman, who stepped into a highly volatile, intensely scrutinized situation with the Mercury. He inherited a roster fraught with massive contracts, aging superstars, demanding personalities, and a desperate need for a cultural reboot. Instead of panicking and throwing his established veterans overboard the moment he took the reins to protect his own ego, he leaned into their experience. He didn't view their ambition as a threat to his authority. He viewed it as a weapon to be weaponized against the rest of the league. He navigated the exact same tight salary cap constraints, the exact same media pressure, and the exact same imperative to modernize a stagnant offense. But instead of a reckless $22 million gamble based on subtraction and fear, he orchestrated a masterclass in integration. He modified his playbook to fit the talent he had, rather than destroying the talent to fit a hypothetical playbook. He ran inverted pick and rolls to maximize his bigs. He staggered minutes to keep his veterans fresh. And he communicated with his players like the grown adults they are. The result? He led a unified, motivated locker room to an immediate resurgence, proving definitively that you don't have to destroy a player's career to build a winning culture. He didn't demand blind loyalty. He earned it through competence and respect. The contrast is absolutely blinding, and it thoroughly indicts the Indiana Fever's cowardice on every conceivable level. The systemic failure happening in Indiana goes so much deeper than just one team's isolated roster moves. First, what this means for the concept of loyalty in the WNBA is absolutely devastating. It sends a chilling, undeniable message to every single incoming draft pick that no amount of hard work, no amount of statistical production, and no amount of physical sacrifice will protect you from being arbitrarily discarded the moment an executive decides they want a cleaner spreadsheet. Second, what this means for the future of team building in this league is that we are aggressively entering a dark era of disposable rosters where players are treated as temporary rentals rather than franchise cornerstones, destroying the fan-player connection that the WNBA was built upon. Third, the human and financial cost of this calculated erasure of talent is staggering, forcing established adults to uproot their entire lives, break apartment leases, pull their families out of communities, and abandon their local off-court business ventures on a whim, all to satisfy the ego of a front office that refuses to be held accountable. Fourth, the leadership implication for Stephanie White is a massive, permanent, indelible stain on her tenure before it even truly begins. She has explicitly signaled to the entire league, to free agents, and to her own locker room that she prefers quiet compliance over loud character. And that is a tremendously dangerous precedent for any head coach to set in the modern era of player empowerment. Finally, the contrast that proves it all is the undeniable, quantifiable success of coaches like Tibbetts, who build trust instead of burning bridges, exposing the Fever's strategy as nothing more than a desperate power grab masked as a basketball decision. When you look at the blind loyalty these players gave, the staggering statistical value they provided night in and night out, and the cold, unfeeling corporate way they were shown the door without a second thought, you have to ask yourself one final, haunting question about the true cost of this $22 million gamble. If an organization is willing to brutally betray the very foundational players who carried them through the absolute darkest years in franchise history, What exactly are they going to do to their new golden stars when the lights finally start to fade and the inevitable adversity hits? The hypocrisy is breathtaking when you truly analyze the timeline of these decisions. For years, the Indiana Fever sold their fan base on a promise of patience. They told the loyal supporters in Indianapolis to trust the process, to invest their hard-earned money in season tickets because they were building something special from the ground up. They plastered the faces of these exact departing players on billboards, on the sides of arenas, and on season ticket renewal brochures. They commodified their personalities, monetized their highlights, and leveraged their relentless work ethic to maintain relevance in a hyper-competitive sports market. And the players delivered on their end of the bargain. They showed up to every community event. They signed every autograph. They smiled through every grueling post-game press conference after heartbreaking losses, embodying the very definition of blind loyalty. They were the bridge that carried the franchise from irrelevance to the promised land of national television broadcasts and sold-out arenas. But the moment the promised land arrived, the moment the franchise secured generational transformative talent that instantly elevated their national profile and financial valuation, the bridge was immediately detonated. This wasn't an amicable parting of ways. This was a calculated erasure of talent designed to ensure that the new regime receives 100% of the credit for the team's future success. They didn't want any remnants of the past around to remind people of who actually laid the bricks for this foundation. This $22 million gamble is entirely predicated on the arrogant assumption that chemistry can be manufactured overnight, that you can simply plug and play athletes into a system like lines of code in a computer program, ignoring the human element that actually wins championships in high-stakes environments. The Fever's front office operates under the delusion that they are the smartest people in the room, constantly outsmarting themselves while alienating the very workforce that sustains them. Let's dig deeper into the actual basketball mechanics of this disaster, because the defensive implications alone are enough to get a general manager fired in any functional organization. The players they just unceremoniously dumped were their premier interior defenders, the defensive anchors who understood the complex rotational schemes required to survive against the elite front courts of the New York Liberty, the Las Vegas Aces, and the Connecticut Sun. They possessed the sheer physical strength and veteran savvy to deny deep post positioning, to contest without fouling, and to secure the critical defensive rebounds that ignite the transition game. By executing this calculated erasure of talent, the Fever have essentially rolled out a red carpet to the rim for every opposing offense in the league. They have traded proven, hardened defensive grit for theoretical offensive spacing, completely ignoring the fundamental truth of playoff basketball. If you cannot get a stop and you cannot secure the rebound, your transition offense literally does not exist. This is the absolute crux of the $22 million gamble. They are betting the entire future of the franchise on a one-dimensional, offensively skewed roster construction that historically collapses under the intense physical pressure of the postseason. And they are doing it while simultaneously alienating the veteran presence that is absolutely vital for guiding young players through that exact pressure. It is a catastrophic miscalculation born of arrogance and a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually builds a sustainable winning culture in professional sports. The arrogance is further compounded by the way they handled the media narrative surrounding the departures. Instead of owning the decision and respectfully acknowledging the immense contributions of these athletes, the organization engaged in a subtle, cowardly whisper campaign behind closed doors. They allowed anonymous sources to suggest that the departing players were unhappy with their roles or resistant to change, deliberately attempting to damage their reputations on the way out the door to make the front office look like the victims. This is the ultimate betrayal of blind loyalty. It's not enough to take away their jobs. They had to try and take away their dignity to justify the front office's glaring administrative mistakes. But the players in the WNBA are too smart, and the fans are too observant to buy into this manufactured corporate spin. The players around the league see exactly what is happening in Indiana. They see the ruthless, transactional nature of a front office that views them as nothing more than expendable assets on a spreadsheet. And this will have severe, long-lasting consequences for the Fever's ability to attract top-tier free agents in the future. Why would any established, elite player willingly choose to sign a contract with an organization that has demonstrated such a flagrant disregard for its foundational pieces? Why would you subject yourself to a culture of fear, where your job security is entirely dependent on your unwavering compliance to a head coach's ego? The $22 million gamble isn't just risking this season. It is risking the entire reputation of the franchise for the next decade. This is why the contrast with Nate Tibbetts is so utterly devastating for Stephanie White and the Indiana front office. When Tibbetts took over the Mercury, he didn't demand compliance, he demanded collaboration. He understood that a head coach's job isn't to force players into a rigid system, but to design a system that maximizes the unique talents of the players on the roster. He looked at a locker room full of strong, opinionated, highly successful women, and he didn't see a threat. He saw a resource. He empowered them. He listened to them. He treated them as partners in the pursuit of a championship. And in return, he received their complete buy-in, their maximum effort, and their unwavering respect. He achieved through empathy and strategic flexibility what the Indiana Fever are desperately trying to achieve through intimidation and the calculated erasure of talent. The results speak for themselves.